Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Galactic Core podcast here for another week and another live episode, as I'm going to be doing all the time now. So it's great to welcome you to the show. I, of course, have some great guests as we're going to be covering a Marvel series of Agatha All Along. It's going to be a Marvel-themed episode, so we're going to be chatting about Marvel in 2025 and beyond in terms of our favorite projects coming up, what we want to see, and also, because it's a Marvel review, the return of the most pointless game in podcast history, which is going to be MCU or Real Life You. It's been a minute since we played that game. It is absolutely the worst game I've ever invented in my life. But it's a little bit of fun. Why not? Welcome to the show, everyone. It is in the UK. It's sort of early afternoon. I live on the south coast, and there's been a storm battering us, so it's absolutely terrible outside. It's nice to be inside, nice and cozy. My American friends who have come on the show today have joined us very early in the morning for them. So no matter where you're in America, it's going to be early right now. But I am very pleased to welcome to the show returning guests, the two best sisters in all of podcast history. Please welcome to the podcast, the Sisters Assembled podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having us back. So excited to be here.
How are you doing, ladies?
Doing good. Heading into the holiday season, so it's busy, but can't complain.
Yeah,
Indeed.
always a lot going on, but all good things, right? And What If's coming up for us, Craven's coming up for us, so we're busy on the podcast too, so we can't complain about it.
No, it's going to be a busy month, to be fair, because I've got Skeleton Crew, got Craven, I've got What If coming in, and my birthday as well is right after Christmas, as well as Christmas. So yeah, busy time of year.
Yep.
How's 2024 been treating the Sisters Assemble podcast? Because obviously I follow you guys on Instagram. You've been doing a lot. To be fair. You've been having a lot of fun from what I can see as well. So yeah, how's it been for your podcast?
Yeah, it's been good. We've definitely been trying out some new things, joining some different platforms, and also just getting to cover some really good content. I know there's been a little less than I think we're used to this year, which on some hand is a little bit less stressful for us, but also really good stuff. We love doing, obviously, Deadpool, Wolverine, X-Men 97 was quite the time. So busy but good, and trying new things, I think, is like the headline, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree. We did just join TikTok, so we feel really good about that.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I've been on TikTok personally for about 5 years. The podcast is on there, although I don't post too much because it's mostly just clips from the show. But yeah, I absolutely love TikTok. You'll get addicted to it if you don't do it like personally already. So
oh yeah,
there's a time limit on my phone for a reason.
Yeah, I just sit. It's what I spend most of my bedtime when I go to bed. I'm like getting to bed, and then it's like an hour and a half later, and I'm still scrolling through TikTok.
oh, it's horrible. It's the doom scroll. Yeah.
Excuse me. What did you? I mean, you mentioned Deadpool, Wolverine there. Obviously, probably it's the only Marvel film that we've had this year. One of the biggest probably Marvel films of all time. What did you guys think of that, just quickly? Because I loved it. I got to do obviously a quick review on it. But yeah, it's recently come to Disney Plus, so I got to sit down with my wife and got her to watch it for the first time. And I watched it back and went, yeah, I still love this.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely were big fans. I think our only criticism, if you want to call it that, was that it didn't necessarily usher in the mutants the way we thought it would, and the way Kevin kind of hyped it up. So that was like the one place we thought it felt really short, but otherwise super fun. Hugh and Ryan are just such a dynamic duo, and it was just cool to have Deadpool be able to play with all of the elements that he really hasn't been able to before. So yeah, big fans of that one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it twice within the first week. So I saw it opening night for us to go cover it, and then we went back and saw it again. And I do have to watch it still on stream. I haven't watched it on Disney Plus, but I really enjoyed it. I'm also a Gambit fan, so I finally that was like my swan song. So I'm very happy about that movie.
Fair. I mean, yeah, it came out about 3 days before my baby was born. So it was like got to the cinema. I think I went twice in like the 2 days it first came out, and then because I knew I wasn't going to get a chance to see it again for a while. So yeah, first got to see it a couple of times. I mean, having watched it on streaming the other night, I I don't know why. The scene at the end where obviously you got Deadpool and Wolverine trying to stop they're trying to hold the antimatter and matter sort of bits, and you got the Like a Prayer orchestral music going over the top of it. And despite the obviously needless, yet absolutely needed bit of Hugh Jackman being topless for that scene, just the whole emotionless, like the music going together and them like thinking that they were going to die and stuff, that actually kind of gets me quite a bit, like in the 3 times I've watched it. So yeah, I do really love that film. It's been great, but Marvel 2025, we've got a lot coming up next year. Marvel are returning to this thing of doing sort of a movie like every 3 months or so, and a couple of series to fill in between. It's not going to be sort of held to the wall as it was like 2021, 22, that sort of stuff, where like there was no break between anything. It was like movie led to a series, led to movie, led to a series. You're going back to the old type of film schedule, 3 maybe 4 movies a year, a couple of series in between. There's a lot to come in 2025, though, even if you count the animated series that we're going through as well, because obviously, as we mentioned, we've got What If Season 3 final season. I'm really looking forward to that because I've been a big What If fan. Marvel Zombies off the back of that next year as well, which is going to be good. The Eyes of Wakanda animated series. Then at the start of the year, we've got the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man animated series. So a lot of animation going on for them in between the general series that we're getting. But big films coming. We've got Thunderbolts coming, Fantastic Four, and Captain America, obviously, on Valentine's Day. So for all you lonely hearts out there, you can go and watch that rather than being with your partner on Valentine's Day. What film out of those 3 are you most looking forward to for next year?
You want to go, Katie? Because I know your answer. So I'm looking most forward to Thunderbolts. Deep in my roots from the very beginning, I am a Bucky Barnes Winter Soldier girl. So I'm very excited to see him return. But also, I have a thing for our anti-heroes. They're my favorite type of stories that we see. So I'm really excited to see this group specifically come together. I think it's kind of going back to like that Avengers feeling. We haven't really had a big team up movie other than kind of Deadpool and Wolverine. So I'm looking very much forward to the team up, but also just like the crazy dynamic that I know all of them are going to bring to the table. It's just going to be insane. And I've been looking forward to this movie pretty much since it's come into conception. So I'm very excited. I think it's also a May release and I'm a May baby. So that's exciting for me. That's my birthday present.
Nice.
I think for me, it's got to be Fantastic Four First Steps. For the same reason Katie loves Sebastian Stan, I'm a Pedro Pascal girly, so I cried when he was cast as Reed Richards.
Daddy Pedro, yeah.
Yes. So good. So good. I mean, the TikToks are just amazing, going back to that. But I'm super excited, even beyond the cast, which is stacked and amazing. I think, when you look at the slate long term, knowing that we're going into Secret Wars, that movie is going to be huge for setting that up. So even from like a larger MCU storytelling standpoint, I think we're going to get a lot out of that. It's the Fantastic Four done right for the first time, maybe ever. So super, super excited about that one.
I mean, Thunderbolts, the whole thing with Thunderbolts is intriguing because even though we've had like 2 trailers now, we still don't really know what the plot of the film seems to be. They seem to be sort of keeping that to themselves. I'm on the Bucky train as well. I've been a Winter Soldier fan for quite some time. Every time he comes on screen, especially when he's got the slightly longer hair, all I hear from my wife sitting next to me going, he's so hot. And I'm like, yeah, cool. That's, I suppose, acceptable. I can accept Sebastian Stan. Yep, hot guy. But yeah, especially with the whole mystery behind the asterisk at the end of Thunderbolts. So the prevailing theory, what I've heard from friends, other podcasters, and the wider public seems to be that at the end of the film, they'll scrap the name Thunderbolts and they'll be called the Dark Avengers. Katie, any thoughts on that?
I have to say that's kind of been the theory I've been seeing as well. I think from the very jump, we actually had a lot of conversations prior to the Thunderbolts actually being announced. And it wasn't with this group specifically, but we did have conversations about the possibility of Dark Avengers. And we were talking about that on one of the episodes at some point. Who knows? But I had to say I was a little shocked that they went with the Thunderbolts name just because once you saw the roster and the idea behind it. So I would love for that to be a thing. I also, the one trailer straight up says, like, I think it is Bucky. That's like, we can't call ourselves that. So I think it very much is indicative that they're not going to keep the Thunderbolts name. And I'd love for it to become the Dark Avengers because they're also an Avengers Tower. Like, come on, you set this up.
Taylor, what do you think to the lineup of the Thunderbolts? Because a couple of them, I think, definitely should be in there. But then maybe there's a couple on the tail end of it that there's a surprise that they brought them in to do this particular one. I mean, we know that Valentina's been going around sort of hand picking people, so no surprise that the US agents in there, obviously Bucky, Yelena, possibly even Red Guardian, you could say, but a couple on the tail end, maybe Ghost was a bit of a surprise to be in there. Obviously, maybe Sentry. That was a lot of back and forth about whether he actually would, and then was recast going in there. I mean, yeah, what are you thinking about the lineup for the Thunderbolts?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think everybody is kind of clearly belongs there, but Ghost and Sentry. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they integrate them. But even if you just think about, the powers of the four that you mentioned, they're super soldiers or trained assassins. They all kind of go together. And then you brought in this character who can like phase through matter, and another character who is very kind of space oriented and like really like god level power type guy who can kind of blow the rest of these people off the map. So they do definitely feel a little bit like outliers. I'm excited to see Ghost again. Like, I'm not upset that she's on the roster because I think she's a cool character and I would like to spend more time with her. I'm also excited to see, I think Taskmaster is part of it too, or going to be involved. And I think she's really cool. So I think, and she kind of goes a little bit more along with the assassins and, the super soldiers. So I'm excited that they're kind of using this as an opportunity to bring back characters who could have kind of fallen to the wayside, be like, oh no, we have, continuing stories to tell with them. So it'll be interesting. I think the dynamic and the personalities are going to make this a wild ride.
That's fair. I mean, speaking of along the wayside, because it's an episode I'm going to be doing sort of early next year, but I just want to get some thoughts from you two about it. So things are on the wayside, characters that have been put to the side and haven't really brought back, or storylines or threads that have been put to the side. So the amount of post-credit scenes that have hinted at things, or people that have been introduced and we've sort of never seen them since, and either shows we've been told that we're not getting more of, or they're going to have to usher them in to something else to make it make sense for us in the MCU. Is there a big thread or storyline or character that's been touched on in the last, probably like since obviously I guess post Endgame, isn't it, we were talking about, that hasn't come back yet and you're surprised or you need to see more? So we're talking about things like whether it's Hulk's son from She-Hulk, or was it Star Fox at the end of Eternals, or obviously what's going on with Eternals in general, like Arishem coming back for Judgment.
Yes.
Obviously the ongoing stuff with Black Knight and Blade. I mean, Taylor, let's start with you. Any thread you need or character you need to see back because they've just forgotten about it?
Yeah, I think for me it is gonna be Black Knight. Because having Mahershala Ali with the voiceover and knowing that we're still kind of getting that film supposedly at some point, TBD. I really want that to kind of pay off. I think too, something that we've been talking a lot about, because we did cover the Venom movie recently, which seems to be setting up King in Black. Black Knight actually plays a role in that as well, and his sword is kind of something that Null goes after. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I also think don't waste Kit Harington. Like, if you're gonna bring in a big name like that, like, please, like, let that pay off. So I think for me that's the really big one that I'm like, all right, come on, let's figure this out. Midnight Suns too. Like, I think there's so much opportunity there, and I would really hate to see him kind of miss the boat on that.
What about you, Katie? What's the big thread that you need resolved right now?
Mine is in the same vein, but it's Star Fox or Eros from Eternals, or just, I guess you said it, Eternals in general. I think he was the point of trying to set up Eternals 2. That was that end credit scene. But then now it doesn't seem we're ever going to get an Eternals 2, which is a shame. I actually really like the movie. It was one of my favorites when it came out. So I'm a little upset that we're not necessarily going to continue that franchise, let alone you do set up to continue it in two different ways. So that's probably my biggest one. That's the most glaring one out of, especially post Endgame.
Fair. I'm not going to give mine away just yet because I was, like I said, I'm going to be doing a whole episode on it. So come back for that one. One big series from 2025 I want to talk about, because I am going to talk about this on pretty much every episode up until when it comes out, Daredevil.
Yes.
The thing I'm looking forward to most in 2025 personally, above every film, above every other series. I don't think there's anything from any other brand, even like maybe obviously everyone knows I'm a Star Wars man above everything, but I'm probably looking forward to Daredevil more than Andor over everything else. So
wow.
I cannot wait for this. It's so good that they rejigged it, because obviously we knew it was going to be like 18 episodes. It was all over the place a little bit. They came in and went, nope, we're going to make the Netflix stuff canon. We're going to bring back all the characters as well as a couple of new baddies. Obviously, we've already seen Fisk and stuff and Juice, because we actually did Echo together, didn't we? So we've got to talk about Fisk and everything like that. So the return of it. So I am looking forward to Daredevil more than anything else. Obviously, Punisher coming back, my favorite probably character, because I'm similar to you, Katie, in the fact that I like the anti-heroes, so the likes of Punisher and Daredevil and stuff like that sort of walk that line. It's going to be so exciting. What are your thoughts on Daredevil?
Well, I have been waiting for this for a long time. I am a March baby, so this comes out right before my birthday. Like Katie, this is my personal birthday gift from Marvel. They really scheduled exceptionally well next year. So, yeah, I mean, I loved the Daredevil Netflix series. I've been waiting for this for a really long time. When it was announced, I was so excited. I'm thrilled it's not going to be 18 straight weeks because that's exhausting from a podcast perspective. But I just think it's going to be so good, especially now that he can really, like with Deadpool, like you have these characters who existed outside of the MCU and they were definitely hamstrung in a way because they could, hint at things that happen in Avengers or hint at this character or that character, but never like fully be integrated. And I just think that the opportunity to connect him with so many things, like we've seen a tiny bit in some of the other properties, is just going to up level it even further. And knowing that they've brought so many characters back, like I'm excited to see what they do with Bullseye, who I think was underutilized in the third season. So it's going to be, I think, and I hope, probably one of the best things that they put out next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I have to say I bring a different perspective because I'm only working through the Defenders universe now. So I've only seen the first season of Daredevil. I'm almost done with Jessica Jones' first season. I'm doing the whole thing. But what I've already seen, I really like, and I've really been into. I really liked him when they had him in the MCU and She-Hulk and No Way Home. Like, I liked that little bit of him being in. I like the character. So I'm very much excited for it. I am going to be all ready for it by the time it comes. I'm counting down. I'm looking at the calendar. I'm trying to see how much time I have, but I am really excited. I think it's going to be really cool. And I'm glad that they're bringing back pretty much everybody. I know when it first was starting to film and stuff, they pretty much overhauled it because they were like, hold on, the fans don't want this. This isn't working. Let's bring back what we know worked. And that's having Foggy and having all of them come back in. So I'm glad that they're just like, yeah, let's continue this the way it needs to be. That's what the fans want. And let's see what they can do with the MCU now, where they have all those other characters.
Yeah. And they even gave him his own catchphrase now, isn't it? So he's like, "I'm a really good lawyer." We're going to hear that everywhere all the time. So, and Katie, not to like up your expectations or anything like that, but Daredevil season 2, hands down the best Marvel series out of everything. I'm just saying. I'm just putting it out there. Other people may disagree, but I think season 2 of Daredevil is hands down the best Marvel series of all time, out of everything. So not to push your expectations up there, but come back and tell me if I'm wrong.
It's next on the list, so I'm excited.
Yeah. I think that the 3 seasons of Daredevil sort of overshadow any Marvel series so far. I don't think anything comes close to it in terms of the overall quality and the storytelling. So because obviously we know Marvel series has been a bit hit or miss. It's either good or it seems to be on the not so good side. But I think Daredevil is for me way top. But that's not just because my personal love of the character. I think just the storytelling. And nice to see the rumors as well that Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage are all going to be maybe have small cameos in Daredevil, or they're looking to bring them back anyway. I like that whole universe, and a lot of people weren't that keen on the Defenders show as a whole, but I personally actually really enjoyed it. So I love that whole universe.
Yeah, I thought it was so fun. I remember watching it and being like, I'm kind of sad they only did like one 10 episode season. Like it was shorter than some of the others, but it's just a fun ride, and I liked seeing them together and interacting. So I do hope they bring them all back. More so Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. Like I don't know, Iron Fist was good the first season. The second season lost me hard, but the other 2 were really, really good.
And then just the last word on sort of on Marvel for upcoming stuff. Post Secret Wars, obviously they've been talking about how it's going to lean heavily into the X-Men and the mutants. Are we excited for this? It's been a long time coming. Does it almost feel like it's too late for Marvel in a way? Because I suppose there is a little bit of jet lag in a way in terms of how everyone's feeling or tiredness about the MCU, because it's 16 years now it's been around. By the time it's going to be 18 19 years by the time Secret Wars has come and gone, and so you're looking at almost 2 decades of it. And then obviously everyone wishes we could have had mutants pre-Endgame and Infinity War to have had that sort of overall stuff. It might have been too much for the MCU if they'd had the mutants there at the same time to tell the story they did. It was almost good they were restricted with what they could do. But on the other side of it, everyone's saying post-Secret Wars, the introduction of the X-Men or mutants in general, plus the Fantastic Four, is going to rejuvenate the MCU and make it feel more fresh because you can pull out all those extra stories. How are you two feeling about the introduction of this post-Secret Wars?
I do think it'll be interesting. I think there's going to be a part of me that's going to be a little sad because I think, you're to your point, we've had 16 at that point. It'll be 18 years of, Avengers stories and of these characters. And obviously they're not going to be completely gone. They're still going to have, TV shows, movies about them, I'm sure. But, they're characters that we focused on for a really long time. And now they're going to kind of be, relegated to the B list. At the same time, I think that there's so many stories to be told with the X-Men, some of which have been done before and can be improved upon, and some of which, we haven't seen yet. I know one that we've been talking about a lot that we're super excited and hope that they do is House of M, because I think that's going to be like crazy, like off the wall level stuff. So I'm excited. And I think nobody is going to do it better than Kevin Feige. So we're in good hands and it'll be fine, regardless of how people feel about phases 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, I think you were kind of talking about rejuvenating and getting a fresh start with them. And I think that's what that is. I know we've had discussions, and I might not have even been on the podcast, but we've had discussions regarding, you can very easily be MCU fans, but I also think there's a whole sector that is just solely X-Men and people who really only care about them. So they might not have even paid a lot of attention to the current MCU, or if they did, they dropped off in phase 4 because a lot of people didn't like a lot of the things coming out from it. So I think you are touching into a whole other section of your fan base, especially with the comics that go along with the X-Men, and to Taylor's point, the storylines. So I do think it would be very interesting to see kind of how you bring back that hype really for the MCU. And I think the X-Men are your answer. I think we haven't had the chance to see it done by Marvel. And so it's their stories. Like, let's see it happen. And then you did mention the Fantastic Four as well. I mean, it's the first family. Let's see it done on the big screen again by Marvel. And I think that's going to be a big thing as well. So I'm excited. I mean, we've talked a lot about it. I can't wait to see the X-Men on our screens.
I think it is going to be an amazing time. I think it's going to. I do think it will rejuvenate a lot of things. Like you said, there are people out there who are solely X-Men or mutant fans rather than Marvel overall, and that'll bring them back to the fore as well. I love the idea of doing maybe an adaptation of House of M, because maybe obviously there's going to be a lot of, especially we know in the comics there's millions and millions of mutants anyway, and it could be a way for the MCU to streamline the amount of mutants that they have by having a big House of M incident and Scarlet Witch wipe out a bunch of mutants, and therefore you can stream it down to a manageable size for them in the MCU, which then in my mind could lead on from that incident to a Avengers versus X-Men film, and the Avengers are like, this is, the mutants are too powerful, you need to be restrained, sort of trying to do what to the mutants what the Sokovia Accords tried to do to the Avengers in a way, and have that as a rolling on story. So I'm excited with what they do to it. I think that there is going to be untold amount of stories that they can tell, obviously, and the interactions across everything. And and they said that recently we're going to start getting some X-Men characters pop up in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect them, to start laying that groundwork. So hopefully we're going to get a lot more X-Men on the way, and we know we are, but obviously not in the next couple of years as well. So
for sure.
Excuse me. Right. Well, that's it for Marvel 2025 and sort of beyond for now. What we are going to do is we're going to get onto the most pointless game in all of podcast history. It is MCU or Real Life You. A return to the game that we haven't had for quite a while, because obviously I've not been around for a while. But just a refresher on what this is that I'm going to give you a MCU character, the real life person that plays them, and your co-host, and you have got to tell me who would you rather spend the day with, who would you rather go out to dinner with, doing whatever you want for the day, going to a theme park, just going to a fancy restaurant, just hanging out and chilling on the sofa, eating crisps, whatever you want to do for the day. But tell me who you prefer to do it with, and just because your sisters, don't hold back. I want to hear.
We will.
But Katie, we'll start with you. This is an Agatha themed MCU Real Life You as well, since that's going to be the show we're reviewing today. So straight in with the big hitter for you, Katie. We've got your sister Taylor, Agatha Harkness, or Catherine Hahn. Who would you rather be spending the day with?
I'm going to go with Catherine, because I honestly think she's just Agatha in real life. If you look at any of her interviews, like she seems so awesome. I also had watched her in Parks and Rec. So she just seems like the most fun person ever. So I'm going to have to go with her. I love her.
Fair. I thought you might go for Agatha personally. I mean, but I think there's always a chance with Agatha that you say the wrong thing and she might just turn you into a toad or something. So
Yeah.
I think probably the safe and good choices, a non-lethal choice is going to be Catherine, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
Taylor, for you, an interesting one. So it's obviously your sister and co-host Katie over here. Lovely. Why wouldn't you want to spend the day with her? Aubrey Plaza or Mistress Death Rio?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, not to copy Katie, but I'm gonna go with Mother. And I mean, Aubrey Plaza is like she's so unpredictable. And I mean, so is Death, but like Death is unpredictable in the way that like you might actually die. Whereas like Aubrey is unpredictable in that you might like find yourself in the most crazy and like incredible situations just sheerly by being in her orbit. I also think like I know that she's best friends with Lizzie and like they, maybe Lizzie pops up for a cameo in my day with her.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to go with Aubrey on this one.
Fair. I think that's a good choice. Yeah, I'd be scared to spend the day with Death, I think, to be honest. You never know
Yeah.
what's going to happen on that one. I mean, if
A
she wants
lot
to
of
take me along like an intern for the day and just show me the ropes of what she's doing and go and collect a few souls, I'd probably be down for that. But too scared at the end of the day, she's just going to tap me on the shoulder accidentally and I'm just going to be dead myself. So
I also feel like there's a lot of like larger like conversations I'd be having in my head about spending the day with Death. And I like don't really want to go there.
fair enough. Okay, Katie, your second and last choice for today. So we've got obviously your lovely co-host Taylor over here. We've got Billy Maximoff, as we see him in the show, older Billy, or the actor that plays him, Joe Locke. Now, I don't know a lot about Joe personally. I've not really seen him in anything before, so I don't really know what he's like as a person. But who are you choosing out of those three to spend the day with?
I'm gonna go with Billy on this one. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, he totally made up the Witch's Road. So I mean, if we could go on the craziest adventure at this point. I don't even know what we could be doing. And he also just seems really cool. Plus, look at who his mom is. And if there's a chance to have an ability to meet her, I would love to do that. So yeah, I'll go with Billy.
Fair enough. And since he's got the powers, those same powers to make stuff out of nothing, just say, any chance you can just warp this handbag into reality for me and just get a few gifts out of it, maybe? Why not? And then lastly, Taylor, for yourself, as we mentioned, we've got your lovely sister, Katie, here. No one's picking each other yet. Maybe this is a chance for Katie. I got a
We
chance.
spend way too much time together. It's like not necessary.
Yeah, it's probably the worst choice I could have done. Is like pick each other. Hey, why not? Yeah, you got Katie over here. Evan Peters or Ralph Boner.
I mean, that's easy. Yes. Evan Peters. I mean, Ralph Boner, like, look, poor guy. He's kind of off his rocker. He's been through it, dealing with some serious PTSD. I am not equipped to handle that. But Evan Peters, like, I would love to spend a day with him. He's so cool and he's done such good work. I would love to just pick his brain. That one's super easy.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd probably be scared to spend it with Ralph after everything he's been through.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, probably a good choice there. But thank you, ladies. Thank you for playing again the most pointless game in all of podcast history: MCU or Real Life You. And we're on to the main event. Here we are, Marvel's Agatha All Along. This was a long time in coming, announced obviously after the WandaVision series back in 2020 that the show was going to be coming. So it's taken just a touch over about 3 years to get its way to us. Maybe some what turned out to be clever marketing along the way, and the fact that it had about 4 or 5 name changes, and then it was revealed that these were actually episode names, and the big reveal that it's actually called Agatha All Along. So see, personally, not necessarily a show I was that fussed about in the run-up to it, because I was just like, oh, okay, show about Agatha from that series. It was more obviously supposed to be about Scarlet Witches. Is this something the MCU needed or really was crying out for, this show about Agatha and the Witches' Road, so to speak, or the Witches? I mean, Witches are always an interesting one anyway. No harming having a show about them. But Taylor, was this, when the show was announced and the build-up over the last 3 years, was this something that you were crying out for personally, or were you just like, damn, I need to see more of this?
I was not, like, it was definitely not on my list of like, ooh, I am going to be super excited about this. I was, mildly excited because it's an MCU show and you never quite know what you're going to get. But yeah, I think it was not maybe my top choice. At the end, it ended up being probably my favorite MCU post Endgame show of all time. I think it's the best one that they've done. I also think that, in terms of whether we needed a show directly about Agatha, I think the show is so much bigger than just her character. I loved getting to spend more time in the mystical realm because something that we've talked a lot about is, the only real mystical touch points that we've had so far are the Scarlet Witch and the folks over at Comertage. And so to be able to understand how magic is interpreted and done by different groups of people, I thought was really interesting. And then, having Wiccan being brought in, we've talked a lot recently about, the Children's Crusade and how it could be setting that up and the larger return of the Scarlet Witch. So I think it was really important in terms of like larger storylines, but not necessarily important for the reason of like who the main character was. Though I think Catherine Hahn is a queen and she did a great job with Agatha. The show has so much wider, possibilities that it's opened up.
Well, what about you, Katie? Were you clamming for an Agatha show?
I would say it was probably higher for me than it was for Taylor, but I will say it was maybe for the wrong reasons because I was like, oh, so like the Scarlet Witch is coming back, right? Like that was what I was waiting for the entire show. Obviously, that didn't happen, but we got a lot of great hints at her and other things. But I do kind of think the show was needed in terms of the magic, and T had talked about that a little bit, but we didn't have this realm very open to us before. I love Doctor Strange. I think he's so interesting. I think Comertage is interesting. Obviously, the Scarlet Witch is a huge anomaly, essentially. So it's really cool to see them. But we did a whole episode talking about the different witches that we're just seeing in the show alone because we've never known about a blood witch or a green witch or all this terminology that we've never had to learn before. So it was really cool to kind of open up that realm. And we did meet Agatha in WandaVision, and she was a different type of witch that we didn't have to worry about before. We weren't thinking about witches at all, really, because who thinks past the Scarlet Witch? You don't need to. So I really was looking forward to it in that way, but it wasn't like top of my list because it was one of those where I was like, does this character need a spinoff? What are they gonna do with her? Like, I'm not really like, they left her where she was. I could have been fine with it. I ended up loving it because I love Agatha Harkness. I think she's great, but I just kind of was like, I don't know as a whole if this is a needed show, but I'm glad they did it.
That seems to be, I think, the prevailing opinion is it's not something that was needed or anyone that was really asking for it, but it's been very well received. I think I'm right in saying episode 7 is the second highest rated individual episode of a Marvel TV show, second only to the season finale of Loki season 2. So for that to come out of a show that no one was really that bothered about in the first place of having is pretty remarkable, I think. It adds more questions, but it also adds more depth to the MCU in terms of we finally got to see death. And everyone's now clamoring to like, we really want to see Rio and Thanos interacting because maybe Agatha's taken on that role of maybe being the one that was like in love with death in the MCU. But also it raises questions now about ghosts and stuff like that we never sort of knew before and stuff like that. So we're going to get on to like, so obviously Billy and Tommy and where that's going to be leading in the future as well. But the main plot of the show obviously is that we see Agatha at the start, sort of in this almost like enclosed dream state that she was put in by Scarlet Witch at the end of WandaVision, where she's this detective, and everyone in where is it, Westview, isn't it? They sort of just think she's a bit kooky and a bit weird because she's sort of like interacting with them, but a bit spacey at times. She gets snapped out of it, and we see a bit of backstory as well to her about because she lost her powers and what happened with her mother and the coven back in the day as well. And she tells the story about the Witch's Road after she comes across Billy, who, whilst we kind of knew who he was early on, I think I to be honest, I actually hadn't started the series to the end, so I already knew who he was because that's stuff you can't avoid on social media, unfortunately. Who he was, but it seemed pretty obvious that that's the sort of route they were going with him anyway. And obviously the Witch's Road and meeting the other witches and Agatha wanting her powers back, and yet obviously the goal being to get to the end. I didn't necessarily expect all the other witches to be killed off as well along the way. I was expecting there to be something different about that. And obviously we end with the series with Billy going off with Ghost Agatha to go and find Tommy, and bring him back into the fold. So, Katie, let's start with you. Your thoughts about the overall plot to the show, and was there anything that you thought that was really missing from here that you wanted to see in it now that we've sort of completed this story?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned at one point to Taylor that they pretty much did the WandaVision blueprint and just were like, that worked, so let's do it again. But they did it differently enough that I really appreciated it. I thought as a whole,
Yeah.
I enjoyed the show. I thought it told the story right. I think episodes 8 and 9 had some parts I probably could have switched a little bit. I think the order in which they told those last 2 episodes weren't my favorite. But otherwise, I loved it from start to finish. I think it did what it needed to do, and it told a really cohesive story, which we've struggled a lot with, I think, in Marvel TV. But I will say my biggest complaint, and I've gotten flamed on the internet for this, so I will probably get flamed more every
Mhm.
time I say it. But I didn't necessarily think they were focused enough on Agatha, even though it was her show.
Mm.
And I was even calling it, I think, from episode 3 already, that I was like, this is about Teen. This whole thing is about him. I didn't know that the Witch's Road was going to be his whole, like, his Westview essentially and his hex. But I definitely was like, this is not, unfortunately, about Agatha, which stinks because, like, it is her show. And I think they kind of tried to shove it in the last episode with the flashback with their son, but I don't think they told the story cohesively enough throughout the whole show to really be like, oh yeah, but this is Agatha's show still. It just felt like his. So that's probably my biggest complaint is I wish we could have delved deeper. I mean, I still don't know really the relationship between Rio and Agatha. They didn't really go as deeply into that as I hoped they would. So I that's probably my biggest complaint about it. But otherwise, I still really enjoyed it. Just from a watching perspective, it was a really good show.
Mm. Yeah, we're going to touch on Rio and Agatha's relationship in a little bit because that's something I definitely wanted to touch on as well. But yeah, I understand what you mean in terms of they spent a bit of time focusing on Teen and his backstory, which I think because of him being Billy, essentially they kind of decided that that's the route they had to go. So yeah, it wasn't always focused on Agatha. They could have spent more time focusing on her relationships, on the people around her and stuff. They tried to obviously intertwine everything so much in those last few episodes by showing that they'd all crossed paths with the other witches at different points in the last few years. I don't think you always need that though. They always have to like try and do everything in together. I don't think you always need to do that, to be fair.
Yeah.
So, but Taylor, what about you? What about the overall story? How did you enjoy it? What would you change if you could?
Yeah, I also really, really liked it. Like I said, I think this is probably the best show that they've done just from a storytelling perspective. Like, I just think it seemed like they did 9 episodes that were meant to be 9 episodes that flowed together, whereas sometimes we get like really crappy first episodes, or I'm looking at like Secret Invasion, where the 6th episode is like one of the worst things I've ever seen. And like, that's awful to say, but it's true. And like, it's really, really bad. Or, you know, it seems like they were too slow at the beginning and they rushed the end. I thought the pacing was really smart, really intentional, and it told a really like cohesive story, which I liked and really appreciated. I think if I was going to change anything, kind of going off the back of what Katie was saying, I do agree they didn't really focus enough on Agatha's backstory. And there are specific things that I think they hinted at in the backstory that then never paid off. Like, one of the big ones is I wanted to know more about her time with the Darkhold. And other than a little bit of a flashback, you know, with it in the bassinet, we don't really understand what that was. We see the flashbacks of her, you know, taking the witch's powers over the years, and you know that's delineated by the different outfits to show the different decades. But at no point does it show that like she found, you know, more power through the Darkhold or any of that. And Rio points that out at the beginning about how she was different with the Darkhold, and yet it never paid off. So that was like a big one for me that I thought was really missing. You know, we name dropped Mephisto, but then didn't actually tie him into the story. And as someone who purposefully said his name in every episode to manifest that we would finally get him after many, many years, I was a little bummed that that didn't happen. So yeah, I think those were like the 2 things that I was like, all right, you've talked about them. Can we not just ignore them in the last, you know, 6, 7 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, let's dig into that part of the story. So obviously, Agatha, yeah, the backstory of what happened with her family, and then showing that she was basically killing witches over the years to take their power, and the witches' road wasn't technically real. It was all a myth that she created and perpetuated, and everyone was sort of bought into it. And then there's no real history on her and the Darkhold, which was disappointing, to be fair. When they sort of laid the plot line of like, oh, rumor was that she sacrificed or swapped her son for the Darkhold, essentially, you're like, they're going to play more on that, and we are going to find out about it. And it was just a red herring at the end of the day, unfortunately. So it was disappointing we didn't get to see where she got the hold of the Darkhold from and all that sort of stuff. But then her history with Rio, this was an interesting one for me, because there was so much hinting at it straight, obviously, from when they fought in the first episode or two, and obviously the hints of who Rio was all along. And she even said it when they were fighting. Agatha's like, don't you want to fight me at my best when I got a bit more power? And she's like, why don't you take my power? She's like, if I do that, I'll die. So little hints from the start that's who she was. Sorry. So, but they don't touch on the fact that they seem to have been in a relationship at some point, or Agatha has got a massive thing for her. And then this whole thing that happened with the son, and obviously they didn't really explain that properly. You're left to it to try and like fill in the gaps yourself, wasn't it? So the whole thing about as a baby, maybe he wasn't due to survive, he wasn't supposed to survive, and Death is like, all I can give you is some time, and then obviously takes him when he's like 6 or 7 or whatever it was, like in the middle of the night. And Agatha wakes up to him passed away. And then there was that bit when they were talking on the Witch's Road about things they regret or wish they could change with people. And like, even Rio says this. She's like, oh, I hurt my friend and I'm not sure she's ever forgiven me, type of thing. And I'm like, but you're Death. Why would you care like about that sort of thing, unless you've got a weird relationship going back with her? So they just never infer more about this potential relationship that these two had, which is weird in itself, that Death would have a relationship with a human. Considering she, in the comics, as we know, she rebutted Thanos all the time, and even killing half the universe to impress her didn't really turn her attention to him. So, what was, Taylor, let's start with you. What was your thoughts on this whole weird situationship that we seem to have seen between Death and Agatha?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I wish they would have shown more than told. I think that both Agatha and Rio, to all of the examples that you just gave, talked so much about how they were both so affected by their, romantic relationship. And then we don't ever get to see it really. I think they have one kiss in the entire series, and then she calls her my love a couple of times in, throughout different flashbacks and things. And I think it's hard to then be invested in the relationship, or not even be invested. It's more like understand the depth of the relationship if you don't actually see it in any form. They're just saying to people, oh, this is how I feel, which is so much weaker. And I think that it would have been easier to understand as an audience member why Death was acting the way that she was, and creating loopholes, if we saw the depth of their love for one another. And I think that was definitely a weak spot in the show, and they should have spent more time focusing on that versus leaving little verbal hints that really just didn't drive home the level of emotion that both of the witches felt.
And what about the whole thing of why she was trying to kill Agatha at the start as well? Like, I didn't really understand what the reason behind that was. Like, is Agatha outstayed or outlived beyond what she should have done, and Death was then after her? Like, that didn't really make sense to me either when you watch about the whole series. So, Katie, what were your thoughts on the whole situation between them?
Yeah, I mean, I reflect a lot of what Taylor was saying. I just think, and that's why it's my biggest complaint, that Agatha as a whole, I don't really think her story was told properly. I mean, we had a whole episode on Teen, literally trying to figure out his identity. And then we went into the whole road was about him. It was built by him. So while that was super cool, just when the show's Agatha's show, I think it was really hard to also look over at her and feel like she was really a character we got a whole story told about. And Rio is a huge blind spot. I think I didn't even feel that way. I think the hints were okay. I think I was doing fine up until the actual flashback where you see Agatha about to have her child. And you can already tell these two have had a relationship, because she's like, no, not now, my love. Like, please don't do this. And so that's kind of, they're driving off of their emotions for each other, why she decides to give her more time with Nicholas and everything else. So I guess I kind of struggled with, okay, great, but how'd we get here? Like, I feel like you started me in the middle of Agatha's story. And so I know what happened to her coven and her mom. I know what she did to them. But then it's like, I see this, but I still don't know how we I don't know the foundation of anything with Rio, but they already have a relationship. They clearly are already having emotional ties to each other. I just don't know what that is. And it was never explained. It was never even, Taylor was saying show don't tell, but like it wasn't even told. We don't know how they met. We don't know any of that stuff. And now listen, I don't need an entire relationship rundown, but in this case, when so much of her story was kind of hinging off of it, I needed more. I needed to understand these two together and then understand, to what you were then saying, why is Rio there? Why is Rio want Agatha dead so badly? What is going on? What's their entire relationship based off of that's making her feel these angry feelings? Like, I don't know. I'm still confused.
And where do we go with the character of Rio or Death from now? In what capacity does she come back? Is it in if they do a series for Billy finding Tommy? Whether that happens in Vision quests, maybe they find White Vision and he joins in on a quest to find Tommy as well, or is it something that maybe you bring her back in, say, Secret Wars? Is it? It's going to be a massive adaptation of the comic story, but if a bunch of worlds are completely obliterated and you end up with a prime universe, does Death turn up and pissed that all these lives have been taken from her? That should have been hers. So, I mean, Katie, any thoughts on where we go with the character of Death from now for the MCU?
Yeah, she's a very complicated character, I think, because whenever you have characters who are like essentially entities, it's very difficult to figure out what to do with them as a whole. I know I've seen a lot of people talking about Vision Quest because her big thing during all of this was, well, Billy's like a huge anomaly and everything he's done is wrong and he shouldn't even be alive. So I need to claim his soul. So I would think naturally she'd then go after the twin that she was trying to avoid have that happen. And he obviously then shoved his brother's soul into somebody's body. So I do have to assume that's like the natural progression. I also think she's the type of character that I think comfortably fits in the magical realm. I don't really know how you apply her to, like, I imagine her interacting with the Winter Soldier. Like, that just seems absolutely not, like, I couldn't even wrap my head around that. So I think keeping her in the magical realm, I could see her surfacing in like a Doctor Strange 3, maybe, where you do have possibly incursions and death and a lot of other things going on where she would more naturally fit. Also, if the Scarlet Witch comes back, I mean, she's supposedly dead, right? So she might be cheating death. There might be something to that as well. I just think she fits more magically than anywhere else. Maybe to your point, Secret Wars could kind of work. It would just depend on how they do it. But yeah, she's a very strange character, but she said she's in for more. So I don't know what it looks like, but she's coming back.
I mean, Taylor, do you think it's a character we don't necessarily need to have back or shoehorned in anywhere? Because, I mean, whether you have, like, I say a fun thing, but a ridiculous thing where anytime a big character dies now on screen or anything, you just have Rio turn up and usher them away to the underworld. It's just like okay, Death's here to take them, and just a reminder that Death is there in the MCU. Or is it just a character because of who they are? They don't necessarily need to be put in anywhere. That you can just, if you find a natural point to introduce them again, that's fine. If not, then you don't need to, because they're an entity like Eternity or something like that.
Yeah, I kind of hope it's the second one and that it is, really intentionally done and it doesn't just kind of become a little shtick that they're doing. I think it is weird. It's weird timing to bring in Death, considering, and you've hinted at this. One of her most famous storylines is being, the reason that Thanos does the whole snapping of half the universe. And obviously, we all know that they kind of reworked that for the MCU and his motivations there. But, she does have a relationship where we kind of a similar relationship with Deadpool, where he's kind of going after her as well. So maybe it comes into there. I actually think he and Ryan Reynolds and Aubrey Plaza would play extremely well in the sandbox together. So that could be really cool if we're looking at like one specific example. But yeah, I hope it is more like an intentional, all right, this makes sense for her to come in because, this person died or there was death on a massive scale, like in Secret Wars. I think what is also interesting is, oh, I just lost my train of thought. There was another point there. Darn it.
Happens to the best of us.
I could feel it going, and I was like, maybe if I keep talking, I'll remember what I was going to say. Oh,
it comes
that
back.
is,
go for it.
it's back. It's back. I think the other thing that I thought was really interesting with Death is we've seen interpretations of the afterlife in different, cultures. So we've had the Wakandan afterlife, we've had the Egyptian afterlife. There's one other that we've seen that I can't
Valhalla.
remember. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
So it is interesting because then the question becomes, well, if she is the entity of death, is she the entity of death for all of these cultures that we've already seen, or, you know, just different, like those who maybe don't believe in those depictions of the afterlife? So she's also like, it's a question of whether or not she's universally the person who takes souls to wherever they need to go. So from a logistical standpoint, I also have a lot of questions.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, to be honest, isn't it? I'm not convinced it's something the MCU or Marvel themselves would touch on, because maybe it's too big of a thing for them to tackle. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have seen, as you said, the different cultures and what happens after death. I mean, the Egyptian one as well, it was weird because they're gods in the afterlife as well. That, or you got, like, one of them is, they're all technically gods in the Egyptian, on the Moon Knight side of it, weren't they? And one of them just happened to be the what was it, like, the god of the afterlife. And so it makes it, yeah, it's an interesting point I never even thought about, in terms of, like, yeah, would Rio then just be for all the ones that don't have a faith or don't believe in something, and or is she just the grandmaster of all of it, and she just lets each realm have its own little thing going on? Yeah, really interesting question, to be fair. I like that. Something I have to let's tweet Kevin Feige and see what he's got to say for himself on that one. That could be an interesting one. We talked about Billy. Big point, this one, Billy Wickentine, whatever you want to call him for this show, the man of multiple names. So I obviously, before watching the show, I knew who he was, right? But I think my other half worked out pretty quick who he was. I think they sort of did make it fairly obvious, especially when you're trying to obscure his name or his history from being talked about with I can't remember what they called it now. But obviously just obscuring his mouth from when he says those things. The way he comes into being, though, when we get that episode in the flashback of what happened. So when the incident at Westview with Agatha and Wanda is coming to an end, and the shield's being sort of put down and they're sort of wiped from existence, so to speak, but their soul somehow flies up into the air and ends up in the dead body of this kid that's just had a car crash. So first of all, if the kids, I mean, I've got a lot of questions about Billy's coming to be and stuff, to be fair. So stick with me if I ramble a little bit, but it's just the whole concept of, first of all, they were supposed to be parts of Wanda's mind that she just brought forth. So, and they only existed inside of that bubble. So how does a soul, first of all, manage to escape that and not be disintegrated when nothing else can escape? And second of all, how old were they in WandaVision? What, like 9, 10, something like that? I think around about that sort of age. And all of a sudden, because he's obviously that age in terms of when he leaves that body and gets thrust into this new one, all of a sudden he's in the age of he's in the body of like a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, who obviously has worked out that he isn't the person everyone tells him he is, but then he's also thrust into a gay relationship with another guy when he's like supposedly a kid. And so to me, there was a lot of questions around how did he actually cope with that. Maybe that's more for my psychologist to help me with rather than anything else, in terms of like, how would someone cope in that situation? But to me, it was a very strange way of going about it, and all of a sudden he like accepts that he's like a grown-up, and he has a grown-up way of thinking and going about things and stuff. And how is it that his soul is thrust out and isn't disintegrated, and yet he gets the powers with it as well? To me, there's a lot of questions about how this has come to be, and because I don't know a lot about Wiccan from the comics, to be fair. It's not a character I'm overly familiar with, but yeah, to me there are a lot of questions. Taylor, what did you think about Billy character? Have you got any questions the same as me, or am I just a madman on this one?
No, we definitely spent a lot of time trying to puzzle this one out. I think where we got really stuck was less like on the mechanism of the soul entering the body, because I think, and Katie, you definitely are the expert on here, but he does do that in the comics where his soul does enter another body. So that's relatively aligned with kind of how, Billy Maximoff becomes Billy Kaplan in the comics. But I think where we were getting stuck was the idea that he didn't have any of the memories of being Billy Maximoff. And there should have kind of been a more like clear delineation, because Billy Kaplan, like the OG, like guy who grew up being Billy Kaplan, he died. So there should have been like no remnants of him whatsoever. His soul left the body. That's why it was vacated for Billy Maximoff to go in. So that was definitely a weird thing. And then if you think about that, then like he has no prior memories of his time in the Hex. His development was even, accelerated within the Hex. Like one episode he was a baby, next episode he was a toddler. Within the next episode, he was that 9, 10, 11-year-old kid. But now he has no memories beyond 3 years ago. So he's basically like a 3-year-old, not maybe developmentally, but like in terms of what he actually understands of his own history. So I think he's like able to make his own choices in like commiserate with how old his body is, I guess. And so like be able to like go through that kind of teen angst of like understanding who you are and all of that. So that part made sense to me, but it is weird like when you look at the timeline overall where his memories go out and like where he kind of ends up in terms of questioning who he truly is between Maximoff and Kaplan, when that really shouldn't have even been like a part of the story.
Fair.
Yeah, I think
Anything? Yeah, go for it, Katie. Yeah.
I just think it was so in the comics, I know there's a little bit of that as well, that like hard trying to figure out which version am I kind of thing. So I appreciate that they tried to do that. I think it doesn't work on the screen. And I always like to do like it's not even a real game, but I like to play a little game of like if I was not so into Marvel and I was not researching every single thing that comes out because I need to try and understand it, would I feel like I followed this and would I feel like this made sense? And this is the biggest thing for me that I'm like, no, a normal person is like not going to sit here and fully be like, so why is he this person, but he's not this person? And, but he is this person. He doesn't know who he is. Like, and we see that even in episode 7, that's the question he asks Lilia. Like he sits there and he's like, so am I Billy or am I William? And I do think it's kind of interesting that while they tried to hold pretty true, I think it just didn't work in the series. And then there were the facts that he had no memories really of being Billy Maximoff, but he knew he was Billy Maximoff deep down, but he like there was no idea of the Hex, but he had this connection with his brother, but he didn't claim Wanda as his mom, and he still doesn't claim her. And he's like, no, that woman's not my mother. But he's very sure that Tommy is his brother and he has a twin brother and all this other stuff. So that just felt complicated. I mean, if you listen to our episode on that, I was heated during it. I won't lie. I went on like a whole tangent about how I just was like, are you kidding me? Like this man still cannot figure out what is happening. This is just an aggravating storyline for me. But it is kind of weird. You bring up a good point that I don't think I thought about. He was solidly like 10 and now he's 16. And I guess maybe they do away with that because they do the whole, well, he doesn't super remember being 10 and he doesn't super remember being that's how he ended. So he's thrust into this 16-year-old's life. I mean, he's in a life he also doesn't claim, but he has to kind of pretend. He says he pretended for his mother or William's mother. So I guess he kind of just made his own personality out of the mix of what he felt was inside of him. But it definitely was weird. And I don't think it played well personally on TV. That might have been something to leave in the comics, but it's fine.
And did they not skip over sort of the time frame of obviously from when Billy jumps into the kid's body and then obviously because there's supposed to be a 3-year time gap between WandaVision
Right.
and Agatha, yet he doesn't. He was because William was with his boyfriend at the time of the car accident, and then they sort of move forward and they're still together at the time of WandaVision. So at the time of Agatha starting the series, yet there only seems to have maybe been 6 months to a year from the way they looked at it time gap. So I think they didn't maybe handle that the best. I don't think for this. That was maybe a weak point for it, and it needed a bit more either explaining or you just don't bother to go into it that deeply. And obviously part of what we see at the end as well, which is when he's trying to find Tommy, sort of like I was going to say telekinetically, and then that's wrong, but you know what I mean. He's sort of using his psyche to try and find him out there, and the whole thing of he's like, Agatha, am I killing this kid to bring Tommy into the world, so to speak, and all this sort of stuff? Whereas like, or is he just finding a kid that was about to die and therefore a body that Tommy could inhabit and this sort of stuff? So a lot of questions out there about what's going to happen there, and obviously the social media for Agatha, have been dropping that the whole thing moving forward is going to be about finding Tommy for them, which I think is going to play into Vision Quest as well. Do you guys feel the same or differently?
Yeah, I think for us, we kind of see it as this like progression, right? So you got Billy back. Now you're going to go hopefully get Tommy back in Vision Quest, and with the ultimate goal of them joining the Young Avengers, right? We know that's happening in the background. So I think that's kind of how we're seeing the progression, is that now you've introduced one in his current form. You got to get the next one. I loved how they kind of did it. It's kind of clear that they don't have the Tommy actor yet. So I thought it was really smart the way that they were like obscured his face, so that like we can all, have our fan casts and who it is in our imagination, but hopefully soon we'll actually get to be able to put a true face to a name now that we've seen his origin. But yeah, I think that's kind of, at least for me, how I've kind of seen how I see the progression moving forward, as we kind of know where the twins are supposed to end up now that we have seen Kamala and Kate hanging out.
Absolutely, yeah. And with America as well, haven't we? With the three of them together. So. But obviously Vision, they've described this now as like a trilogy of series. So you got WandaVision, you got Agatha, and Vision Quest will complete the trilogy of the three Katie. I mean, do you want to see this story continued in Vision Quest, or is there enough of what's going on with Vision to have his own story without having to necessarily dilute it by adding all of this into it as well?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I think logically it makes sense, because if it is going to be seen as a trilogy, you got to finish out all your storylines. So we got Billy. We saw what happened from his progression from WandaVision into Agatha. So it makes sense, I think, to see Tommy in Vision Quest. I also joke, I'm like, well, one show got one kid, one show has to get the other. That's just kind of like what I think has to happen. But I do want to focus on Vision in it. I hope it doesn't get taken away from him the way I kind of feel like this show got taken away from Agatha, to focus and prepare for Billy and, as Taylor was saying, Young Avengers and everything else. I really enjoy Vision. I always have. I think he's a very interesting character, because obviously, I mean, I joke around. I always am like, he's a microwave, but like he's obviously one of the most enhanced, if not the most enhanced, robot essentially. And he is a very interesting person or thing, and I would like to see him come back. I think it was interesting how they went about with White Vision and everything else. So it's been, I don't even know when the show's supposed to come out. Nobody really fully does. So it'll be 4, maybe 5 years since we've last seen him. I want to see him come back. He isn't a character I think should easily be killed off. So I hope they focus on him. I really would like to see Vision come back. He's like I said, a very interesting character. And I mean, there are still characters here, I think, who would appreciate him. This is also kind of in that realm of, hey, why does nobody seemingly care that Vision? Like, there's a White Vision out there that's fighting for his life right now, because he can't feel emotions, but he has all these memories. Like, there's no characters apparently who care about him at the moment. But I would like to see it focus on him. But maybe even at the end, I wouldn't be against seeing Billy and Agatha show up and they find Tommy, and that's just even the last episode or two. And you're like, cool, great. We've established that. Move on, but we've also wrapped up this trilogy. I think it would be nice.
Comment from Amy over on YouTube. Agatha is just escape room challenges with plot, which I think is
like
fair
that.
enough. Yeah, I think that's a fair enough comment, isn't it? So, I mean, let's just talk about the Witch's Road then. Obviously, manifestation of Billy's mind was there, because obviously, like I think you mentioned earlier, they did it in the same sort of vein maybe as WandaVision, where each room has a different theme as they went along. Any particular favorite bits from the Witch's Road? Taylor, let's start with you.
Ooh, that's such a good question. I loved how funny the first one was in the beginning part, where the facial features started to get morphed. But I think also it was cool to see in the hallucinations to start to get hints at some of the backgrounds of the different witches. I think something that we talked about, I think towards the end of the show, as we were able to like reflect on the full story, is like, for example, Jennifer, like that was her trial. She actually got the least amount of background fleshed out, and we find out obviously about who actually bound her later, and that's saved for that reason. But I think that knowing that she's the only one now who's also lived, there are so many stories to be told with her, like in the comics. And I think she might even be a member of the Midnight Suns. Like she has, she's friends with Man Thing, who we've also seen but have not seen for 3+ years. So I say all that to say I liked that, because that particular trial, because we got background on the majority of the witches and could start to put together, all right, this is what kind of her, hang-ups are, and what she's going to focus on, or the different witches are going to focus on each of their trials, and how we're going to dive more deeply into these characters. to fall in love with them only for them all to be ripped from our fingers mercilessly.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like the first one because I think it was the most basic. I think even to that quote right there about it being essentially an escape room, that's what the first one really, really did feel like. You weren't battling demons or anything else that they were doing. They were, progressing through the room essentially. And so I did enjoy that one, but I have to say my favorite was Lilia's because hers was
Mm.
honestly, her trial didn't start by going into the trial. Her trial was essentially the entire show because she was getting her flashbacks or what she calls her gaps the entire time. And I mean, I think Tina at one point is like, Lily is being weird again. Like they all are just writing this girl off because they're like, yo, she's just on another planet. I don't know what she's doing. But then we see where they all fill in. And so I thought hers was the most interesting because, and also I think the most self-reflective for her that she was able to really come through because I mean, Alice's was cool because she got to lift her curse and then she didn't last very long, so that sucked. But then, even
Speaking
with
of which,
yeah,
Amy on
literally.
YouTube, I'm free of the family curse, murdered straight away.
Exactly. I mean, I think she even says it. She's like, I literally just got the curse lifted and now I are you kidding me? Like I'm dead. But then even Agatha's, I think everybody, that was one where everybody was saying, is the trial over? Like that one just didn't feel right. So I think between the first and then technically the fourth, I think those were really your biggest and most interesting trials that you got to see either growth within a character specifically, or you just got to see the idea of the trials and what it was going to look like. So I really liked both of those for those reasons. The middle two were kind of just weird across the board. Not my favorite of them, but I still enjoyed them.
I think probably Lilia's was my favorite because it built up, and as we said, her everything's out of place for her. So her entire sort of parts of her life are all played in her head in different order, and then it all comes together to be the one thing at the end. And
Yeah.
considering that was done with the fact that Billy created the Witch's Road, so her life is completely out of order, and then is only brought into cohesiveness by this kid that came out of some weird reality and is then brought together like that, was definitely very random. And I like the fact that we also had the Salem 7 that played a part obviously in that bit, but sort of hunting them throughout the show. I think it needed something like that. It brought a nice little horror element into like a witch's plot line, but I think without the Salem 7 this actually could have been a little bit boring. I kind of wish they'd lasted a bit longer and that they'd maybe had a true battle against Agatha and the other witches, like a proper magic off and stuff, so to speak. But I liked that extra horror element being thrown into it. I would have liked even more. I would have liked to have seen Death go up against them because she could have easily probably stopped them, but maybe just her like protecting the others because she wants them to progress and die at different points so she gets the bodies, which is that random conversation they had when she's like, you get to the end, I get the bodies. That's the deal. And it's kind of like, okay, you weird fetish over there with dead bodies. But yeah, I mean, just a word on the side characters and on the supporting cast, I should say. Alice, Jen, Lilia, even Mrs. Hart, that obviously gets killed off pretty quickly at the start. But Jen being the only one to obviously survive at the end of the three other witches. Any room for her in any future projects, or is that was just part of this story and it's not needed anymore? Because it's sort of, they seem to like maybe elevate her at the end, and now that she wasn't bound. And again, they did that thing because they tied them all in together and she was sort of bound by Agatha, wasn't she? So any room for her anywhere else? Or is that it now? Are we done with the supporting cast here?
I hope so. I think Zashir like killed it as Jennifer, so I would love to see her come back. I think, knowing a little bit about Jennifer, like Katie mentioned, we did like a whole episode once the names were revealed of the coven of like, who are these ladies? Like every single one of them exists in the comics, has her own stories, like is a main character in her own right. So I was actually kind of bummed to see, Alice go and Lilia go because there were room to tell those stories. So I think with Jennifer in particular, I was most excited that she survived because I think she has the most legs. She, I think, is a member of the Midnight Sun, so you could go there. I wouldn't be opposed to like seeing her interact with a Doctor Strange or a Wong down the line. I think if this is kind of what opens up, this show is kind of what opens up the magical realm, then you have the opportunity for the different aspects to start interacting in ways that other pieces of the MCU that live within the same kind of like street level, for example, you see all the street level characters interact. Well, now a lot of the magical characters, now that we have multiple, can start to interact. So I would love that. Even some of the characters from the Halloween special, the Werewolf by Night special, like she could interact with them, because I think there are those like horror elements, the kind of mystical overall that she could play into. So my short answer is I really, really hope so, because there are stories that can be told with her.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't avoid her, because something that somebody's pointed out online right after the show, and I completely agree with, is let's not forget she's the only technically survivor of the Witch's Road. If you think about it, she is now the only witch that has properly survived, because obviously Agatha and Teen, or Billy, are aware it wasn't real and it was created out of his imagination. So technically speaking, she's the only one who finished it and got out on her own terms. She's also the only one who thinks it's real still. So I think that's such an interesting perspective. That's like, yeah, this witch finished it, left, and she flew off into the sunset thinking that the Witch's Road is 100% accurate, not aware that it was Billy's entire made up little mind game. So I think just having that knowledge, and then also they talked about what she was doing before her magic was taken from her, and that she is a powerful witch and all this other stuff. So I think when you tee a character up like that and then you finally give her power back, you have to continue with her somewhere. I do also think she's cousins or something with Ghost Rider, which is another Midnight Suns tie-in. So I could see her going there. I think Doctor Strange is one of those characters that gets thrown into the Midnight Suns lineup every now and again, but maybe she takes that place, and maybe that's who she is. She's the magic in that. So I'd like to see her again. And again, I don't think you can avoid her. She flew off like Wanda right out of Westview. I mean, again, she knows the Witch's Road is real, apparently. I'd love to see how that affects her life trajectory.
Everything that's happened in Westview, I think I'd be inclined to move right about now.
Yeah.
All these things keep happening there. I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to live here anymore. I want to go and find another little village somewhere and be fine
I mean,
over there.
it's New Jersey. No one's that shocked, I don't think. But, I
don't know. Lastly, then, the last thing I want to sort of talk about for Agatha All Along is the ending to the show. So obviously there is, well, I say a final battle between Agatha and Rio. Not really too much of a battle, but she then sacrifices herself, which may be unexpected because she is quite a selfish character, knowing that because she has this ability to absorb power, so kissing Rio and absorbing her power ends in her death. But then comes back as a ghost, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I mean, it's Marvel, it's comics, to have the famous quote, no one's ever really gone. So it's just bringing someone back. I'm not sure I like bringing her back as a ghost, if I'm honest. I like finality. I mean, anyone that knows and listens to my podcast knows that I always say there's not enough death in these things. Like, letting characters survive through massive wars continuously isn't really realistic. Not enough people die. Everyone seems to survive. How so many people but the main character survived at the end of Endgame was beyond me, because that wouldn't happen if that was a real thing. So having her come back as a ghost at the end of it, I wasn't really much of a fan of that. And then her just sort of going, okay, yeah, Billy, let's go off. Let's go find Tommy together, sort of thing. I don't really see that as being an Agatha trait, to be honest. So, Katie, let's start with you. How did you feel about the ending to this and having Agatha Ghost for the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little weird. I think the entire last episode I struggled with, and this is Agatha to a T, and I get it, but she's very much like, I'm on your side. Never mind self-preservation. No, I'm on your side again. And it's just, I think you saw that in the last episode where she was walking away from Teen or Wiccan at that point, and then turned around and decided to essentially sacrifice herself and give herself to death so that he could leave. So I think she's a very complicated character, and so it's a lot of back and forth. As for her being a ghost, I mean, it's comic book precedent. I will say that. She actually plays a mentor role as a ghost for the Scarlet Witch. So I think it's kind of fitting that instead of having her be the Scarlet Witch's mentor, especially with how they decided to have their relationship in the show, they decided to do it instead for Wiccan. I don't know where that takes her in the future. I'd like to see Agatha again in general, but now you have her as a ghost, and I don't really know how you like de-ghostify someone. So I would have to think it's ghost until she feels ready to move on, because I think that was the whole point too. She couldn't face her son. She wasn't ready to fully cross the line. So maybe helping Billy get Tommy and reconnecting the brothers and everything else, maybe that's going to be her last hurrah. And then she's like, okay, you know what? I did a good thing here, and I feel like I can move on, and I can finally face the son that I feel like I failed. So maybe that'll be it. I don't know. It was a little weird. I was like, oh, great. I liked her ending. I thought the flowers were beautiful. I thought it was entirely symbolic. You could see Death was extremely upset about the fact that she did actually, in the end, have to take her life. So I guess I'm like, oh, like I was a little torn about the fact she popped back up, but I'll deal with it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Like on one hand, it definitely has, that comic precedence. I also think, Agatha is the nanny of Franklin Richards in the comics too. So there is story to be told with her still, even beyond, the twins, if to Katie's point, you are able to deghostify. But I definitely think, to your point, there is a lack of stakes sometimes when characters can just like die and then immediately pop back up. Like I know one that bothers me kind of related to this is, or doesn't bother me because they were actually able to keep him dead, is Quicksilver. Like he's the only character I think in like all of the movies, because even RDJ is coming back. Obviously he's a different character, but like still like he's I think the only character in all of the movies who like died and stayed dead. So in some ways that's frustrating, but in other ways it's like, oh, there is such a thing as like real death now. That's not great, that's the wrong word, but like it's good to know there are some level of like real stakes. I will say like you can skirt some of those rules with the magic realm and all of that, so I get it, but it would kind of be nice to what you were saying, to be like, all right, well, she made that sacrifice and now it is more meaningful, because she couldn't just come back as a ghost to be over Billy's shoulder for everything that he does up until he finds his brother.
And to be fair, even the Quicksilver one wasn't down to a writing choice. It was down to the deal that they made with Fox at the time. Because they weren't technically MCU characters back then, were they? They were owned by Fox as mutants. And the deal was that the MCU got to keep Scarlet Witch and use it if they just did a one shot with Quicksilver, wasn't it? Because they were using him in the X-Men films at the time. So even that unfortunately wasn't a writing choice. I'm sure he would have stayed alive otherwise. So but where do we rate Agatha then in the whole Marvel scale of things? I think to me it was good like I enjoyed it at times. I think a bit like WandaVision, there are bits where you could have not watched episodes and not really missed anything. But at times when it needed to count, I think it did, and it introduced the new characters really well. I'm not sure I rate episode 7 as highly as it has been done, and overall in terms of being the second best single episode of Marvel TV that's been out there. But Katie, where do you rate it in terms of the Marvel scale?
I'd have to say, I mean, I rate WandaVision still pretty highly, and maybe that's just because it was the first one out the gates, and I just think it was done pretty well. But I have to say, it would probably be in my top 5 of shows. I think it all comes down to, and we've talked about this in every single show, we always talk about the progression, and that's kind of how I make a lot of my decisions of, did you actually finish the show? And you did it from start to finish. Did it feel like one show? And so I think it actually did. I think for once, while I do have my complaints, I think for once they actually were like, yeah, here's 9 episodes that fit together. It's cohesive. It's one story. And while it has its moments that maybe don't always work for me, I do think it works in general as a story. I also think I always am really bad with recency bias. So I'm like, if you bomb the last show or the last episode, I'm done. Like the show was bad. Even if the first 5 episodes were great, you bomb that last one, I will just always remember the show was bad. I don't think it stuck the landing completely, but it stuck it enough that I was like, yeah, it still worked. I'm fine with it. It opened up doors. So I'd put it in my top 5. I don't know what the top 5's order is, but it would be somewhere up there.
Yeah, I think it's nice they went into the finale without having to really actually do a fuckload to finish the story off. Yeah. So many of the Marvel TV series, we go into the last episode and they're like, you have got so much to do to cover everything that you've unlocked in this series. And most of the time they haven't hit the nail on the head and they've left a lot of things open. And then we find out we're not getting continuations of it, which is so annoying. But yeah, I think at least we went into a series, this one, where they didn't have a lot to wrap up, and they wrapped up more than enough really to make it a satisfying enough ending, even if it wasn't as maybe satisfying as the rest of the series have been. But Taylor, where do you seat it in the Marvel hierarchy?
I think for me, it's got to be number one. I think it was the best written series of all of the ones that they've released. I think something that we've talked about a lot is like in every other series, there's been one episode where we're like, all right, this was either slow or it didn't make sense. Or to your point, like, I know something we talked a lot about with Ms. Marvel was getting into episodes 5 and 6. There were so many storylines, and we were like, you do realize you've got 2 episodes left, and we didn't feel that. And I especially didn't feel that with this one. And I just think it was so clear that it was intentionally written, and to set things up for sure, but also to be a contained storyline. And I think that's got to be the new kind of mantra moving forward is, yes, leave room to build off of this story and open other things, but at the end of the day, I should feel satisfied as an audience member that you told me a complete story. And I think that this one for the first time actually hit the nail on the head. So number one for me until probably Daredevil next year, but right now it's sitting pretty.
Wow, number one. I mean, if it's pure MCU, if we take away the Marvel Netflix stuff, which is now canon, but technically wasn't written by the MCU people, if we take that out of the equation, I would still have Loki number one. I think for me that kind of is. I love the ending to Loki. I think more than anything, the twist of bringing back He Who Remains and the fact that was all part of his plan, and then Loki going, "I've got to find a way out of this," and then ending up as he did. I think the emotional connection that I felt to that was maybe takes it higher than any other series. But yeah, I think at number one's a brave shout. Not because I think it's a bad choice for number one, but I just think I guess because a lot of the other characters for the TV series we've seen stem from early to mid days of the MCU, like phase 1, phase 2, and so we have a more connection to them maybe we do with someone like Agatha.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably easier to rate some of those series like WandaVision or Loki or probably would be everyone's favorite pick book, Falcon and Winter Soldier, like higher up because of these type things. I mentioned it because I'm a big fan of that show, to be fair. I think I have it in my top
love
3 or
that
4.
show. Yeah,
it is very solid.
I hope this is one of those ones that I can watch back in a few months' time and maybe have a bit more like feeling for it, because it's just like I said at the start, Agatha wasn't something I was clamoring for. It wasn't something I was desperate to see, and I have waited. Normally, obviously, I will watch everything the day it's released, but this show I did wait until baby plays a little bit part into that, having a newborn, but wait until the whole series was done to be able to then watch it all sort of over a few days and go through it that way. So I just really hope it's one of those shows that in a little bit you can look back on, or the progression of the characters make you want to go back and watch it as well. So the more we see of maybe Billy and then Tommy or Ghost Agatha and the whole that storyline, and of maybe Vision Quest makes it a good trilogy of series to be able to watch all together as one story then and go, cool, this is going to be really good. But ladies, thank you very much indeed for coming on this early Sunday morning for you, and obviously chatting all about Marvel with me. Tell everybody at home exactly where we can find the Sisters Assembled podcast.
Yeah, so you can find us on honestly almost all socials at this point. So Instagram, Threads, YouTube, TikTok now. I know I'm already missing some, but pretty much just search us on Sisters Assembled. The podcast is also on pretty much any listening platform of choice. And we also have our website with our blog, which is also at Sisters Assembled. So just do a Google search and you'll find us.
Nice. Any plans for any merch in the future?
They've been in the works for a while, and Katie's glaring at me through this camera, but there will be some nice surprises coming in 2025 as soon as I get my butt in gear.
I can't wait. I've started to become a bit of a collector of getting everyone's podcast merch. So I've been slowly working my way through getting everyone. So I've got like 3 or 4 different podcasts stuff. I need to update my own. I'm like three logos on from where I designed my first t-shirt, and like I've not updated it yet. So I need to get on that personally. But ladies, I really do appreciate you joining me today. For everyone watching or listening at home, obviously the Galactic Core podcast, as I say this on every episode, if you've got to the end of this episode and you're not following me yet, why the fuck not? You've got all the way to the end of the episode and you've not pressed the follow button yet. So make sure you're on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch to follow us on there. You can catch the podcast on all other channels like Spotify, Apple Podcast, everywhere else like that. I'll be back next week with obviously brand new episode, brand new discussion topic. Lots of things coming over the next month or so. I'm doing a special collaboration with Clan Brandalorian for Skeleton Crew. The two of us are going to be reviewing every episode live every Wednesday while the show's on. I'm going to be doing Craven the Hunter on Lights Camera Rant. I'm going to be joining him to review that on there. Nice. We've got What If coming over Christmas as well, which I'm seriously looking forward to, and obviously a packed 2025. So make sure you follow, like, and join us for all of that coming up in the near future. But of course, until next time, everyone,
the Force will be with you always.
Thanks for tuning in to the Galactic Core Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. But until next time, go get your geek on.